Guardians of the Galaxy is the best thing I've played in years. I purchased Guardians of the Galaxies for full price about a month ago after salivating over the glowing reviews online, and as it stands, the game has an 81 Metascore with an 8.7 user score, the latter of which I think is more representative of the game's final quality. For me, it's not that a single player game is a hard sell. Heck, in just the last several months, I've paid full price for Metroid Dread, Skyward Sword, Bowser's Fury, and the Ghost of Tsushima expansion, to name a few. I do buy single-player only games at full retail price, but between my Game Pass subscription and just the way the pricing of games has worked out lately with prices dropping rapidly, especially around the holiday season, forking out what amounts to be about $70 for a finite experience is a much harder sell than it used to be. Even something like Halo Infinite is basically free. And yeah, people will say you have to buy the campaign, but it's on Game Pass day one. So in addition to the free multiplayer, you can play through the campaign and have access to the entire game for just a Game Pass subscription, which is as low as $1 a month if you do one of the many easy to find deals online. While I've now been paying for the Ultimate subscription for some time, there was a period a few years back where I just kept re-upping the crazy deals from Game Pass, and I went something like 14 months consecutively under the service without ever actually paying full price for it. My point is that single player games in particular have become commoditized in such a way that buying them for sticker price is a big ask, bigger than it used to be. And there's even some real incentives to wait it out for 6 months or so until the games can get patched and have new content added to the mix before you dive in. Take my purchase of Control, for example, which is an incredible game that I highly recommend everyone plays. I waited for that game to get a price drop, and it did just a few months after launch. I got Control for about $40, which is pretty much my threshold for this kind of product in most cases. I don't regret paying that amount in the slightest. Remedy is one of my favorite developers, and I am enthusiastic to support such talented artists. That being said, it felt like only days later the game dropped to $20 when a complete version of the game with new content was announced. There's an argument to be made that I should have just waited out another couple months to get the best version. And now, when I go to purchase a game like Horizon Zero Dawn or the new God of War next year, I'm wondering in the back of my mind if playing the game right now today is worth waiting, pay half as much, and get more content in a more polished experience just a little ways down the road. And obviously not all games get this kind of treatment. Only well-received, commercially and or critically successful titles tend to have this kind of extended shelf life that warrants extra content or patching in of new features. Control is an incredible game. It has my favorite single level of this generation in the Ashtray Maze, and the DLC that ties it all together with Alan Wake and expands on the story looks pretty awesome. But Remedy spent more than a year after Control launched continuing to develop and expand on it, taking it from great to one of the premier experiences in the medium. That's the kind of future that I want for Guardians of the Galaxy. I played a bunch of single player titles this year that have really stuck with me. Skyward Sword, Bowser's Fury, Ghost of Tsushima, but even if it doesn't have the most unique gimmicks or necessarily the most engaging gameplay or systems at all times, Guardians of the Galaxy is the one that made me think, this is it. This is why I love this medium so much and invest so much time in it. It feels high tech and modern with its pretty graphics and excellent sound design and high quality voice acting. The campaign isn't overly long, but it isn't short either, and the pacing is pitch perfect for the entire ride. This is a game I think many people will play through in just a few sittings, like binging a streaming series, and I think it's my game of the year. The only caveat to that declaration on my part is that I have yet to play the Halo Infinite campaign on December 8th, which is the last major release of the year I'm going to get extensive hands-on time with. But if you ask me to place Guardians among my favorite, I would place it in the S tier list, next to Sekiro, Mass Effect 2, Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, and the aforementioned Control in the premier class of story-driven, cutting-edge single-player games. And while I've been playing the Halo Infinite public beta these last few days, finishing up GOTG, writing this script, getting footage, it occurred to me how familiar these experiences feel. I don't think video games have changed all that much in the last 10 years or so, and the stuff I'm playing now is the stuff I was playing then with a fancier coat of paint, quite literally in the case of Halo Infinite. But whereas Halo feels like it's mostly gotten bigger and prettier, Guardians of the Galaxy feels more like a perfected blend of the elements that many RPGs of the last gen and current era have struggled to balance. It's not just the systems at play, but it's how seamless and natural it all fits together that makes it feel so unique. Nothing feels like it's included for the sake of it, and every level is thick with story and new locales and unlockables from start to finish. There's not much filler here. There are minimally interactive cutscenes that are short and to the point, and there's a ton of combat dialogue which has been executed poorly in other games, but here feels again like such a natural extension of the characters and the experience as a whole. You are a Guardian of the Galaxy. You would have fun banter with your crewmates. It's a comedy. And writing for video games is often not up to the same level of depth or nuance as, say, Pixar animated films or Premiere TV scripting, but GOTG is probably my actual favorite game script in recent memory. Comedy in games conveyed through game systems and not just cutscenes is a tough act to pull off without feeling forced, especially when Guardians isn't really bringing anything particularly new to the table in terms of gameplay. And I guess you'd say that of those games I mentioned, HCD, God of War, even Sekiro, that Guardians is the purest in execution, even if it isn't the deepest mechanically. And I know it's cliche to say playing a video game really makes you feel like Spider-Man or Batman or whatever, but it's appropriate to say that Guardians of the Galaxy feels, looks, and sounds pitch perfect, and when it's all strung together, it's a perfect harmony of elements. And especially, Guardians is a game that is way more than just the sum of its parts. Individually, there are a few systems at play in GOTG, stuff like combat, leveling, crafting, and a Mass Effect style conversation system, but in my humble opinion, the thing that most embodies just how well Guardians of the Galaxy works at blending functional, quality gameplay with narrative is the Huddle Up special move. Guardians of the Galaxy is a game about your squad being a family and fighting for and with each other. Think of those Fast and Furious memes from a couple of months back. That's the general vibe. So GOTG could easily have you press a button and have the exact same special powers activate, and it would play just fine. Instead, the game blends in narrative by having you rally your team with a rousing speech. You, as the player, get to pick between one of two options, one of which brings the crew to a frenzy and gives everyone a boost, and the other, more comedic option, has the team essentially scoff at your botched attempt to rally the troops, and only gives a boost to the player. It's hilarious, and it's intrusive to the gameplay, but it's completely genius, and in 15 or so hours I've spent with my first run through GOTG, it's something that I never got tired of using and was always excited to use, and having combat come to a grinding halt so a little minigame can play out on paper sounds like a good way to ruin the pacing of combat and annoy players, but it leans into the spirit of what makes it different from Arkham or Assassin's Creed or Mass Effect or any of its contemporaries, and it's just perfect. And if I have any actual criticisms of the game, they are very minor. Perhaps the ending drags on a segment or two longer than it feels like it needs to, but it's a pretty beefy campaign, and I'd much rather the single player experience have more content than less these days. Additionally, the game is pretty stingy with currency items in the early levels, leaving you at base power and abilities until about the 4th or 6th chapter, where you finally, hopefully, have explored and saved enough to be able to afford some of the actually useful unlockable skills. The later game, the last area in particular, showers the player in both types of currencies, which all but guarantees players will have maxed out abilities for the final few fights, which I appreciate, but it also felt like several of the unlocked skills never mattered all that much, whereas the health and shield bonuses were clearly the best picks. And as far as I can tell, there isn't anything else to see in a second playthrough. The game is basically perfect for one extended run end to end, but what you see is what you get. And with the linear level structure, there really isn't much here for completionists or fans to dig into beyond the story. In particular, I would have liked some kind of arcade mode that shows off the combat, allowing you to engage in and customize scenarios the way that the Arkham games do, but as it stands, that isn't here. And it's a bit of a bummer because while I haven't talked about the combat and it isn't particularly deep, it is very fun to engage with. So let's talk about the combat, because I think it's a pretty good taste test for the game at large. Does this look like fun to you? If so, you'll probably enjoy it. But its auto-lock point and shoot mechanics paired with having uncontrollable AI partners with overpowered abilities does give it a somewhat linear feel. It's not so much a sandbox where you try and best solve each puzzle with a unique approach. Having Groot stall enemies in a range and then detonating them with rocket while having Gamora and Drax deal bigger damage to heavy single enemies is pretty much the best strategy the entire game. Even though active shooting feels way more akin to Mass Effect than anything else, the combat as a whole reminds me of the Final Fantasy VII remake from a couple years ago, and it's close to great, but more just pretty good because of the inability to control the AI partners while simultaneously being so reliant on them because of how effective they are. But this means that there are large stretches of encounters where you are just avoiding damage locked on shooting mindlessly while waiting for ability timers to expire. It's fun and it's fine, but it's hardly reinventing any wheels, so to speak, but it doesn't have to, because while it's certainly the core of the active gameplay experience, the stories, characters, and environmental trappings around it are so strong that it elevates the whole experience into almost feeling like a live performance. I guess what I'm saying is this isn't some kind of revolutionary step in any direction. Again, it's more about the whole being greater than the sum of the parts in action, but I did love it for the duration of the campaign, a solid 20 plus hours, and yes, I would probably still be playing the combat scenarios if there was such an arcade mode I could dive into without having to play the whole thing again. And I do plan to play the whole thing again, just not yet. I've had so much fun and such a perfect dose of engagement with Guardians reasons that I think it's fine to let it sit for a while and switch over to Infinite for my PvP mix. But I know I'll be back, and I know that this game has left a bigger impression on me than anything I've played like it in a while.